Hi folks. Okay, this is my version of hot water pastry, a healthy version because usually it's made with lard. Using just plain flour, a fat of some kind, which I'm using rapeseed oil. You can use sunflower or olive oil for the healthy version. Water, salt and pepper, dried herbs, thyme and tarragon there. I'm going to use quite a lot. You might think of salt and pepper here. It's not actually in the scheme of things, but unseasoned or lightly seasoned pastry tastes very bland. Going back to the traditional hot water pastry again, the lard that's normally used, the recipe calls for 3 times the amount of fat than I use in my recipe. It's totally unnecessary, and that amount of lard in your pastry, it's just too much saturated fat and seriously bad for you. My version is arguably good for you. Make a well in the middle, a bit like mixing polyfiller or something like that. I stick it on P. I want to get it hot fast and get on with it. So this is going to boil up real quick. Just be mindful that oil and water won't mix, and it'll get to a point where it might want to spit out a little bit at you. But it's no more scary than boiling water normally. And that was it. This is in real time, it's not speeded up. I love that colour of the rapeseed oil. Makes a very nice coloured pastry. So what you don't want to do here is overwork it. Just push it together nicely, gently. Hot water pastry is very strong. The heat starts cooking the flour and strengthens the gluten strands straight away. So if you overwork it at this point, it'll become like rubber. So if there was anything to be mindful of making this recipe, it's just take it easy on the mixing. Now speeding it up here because it's not that interesting, but I think you get the gist of it. Just roll it around a bit. It's rather nice. It's like hot Play-Doh, because that was just boiling a few seconds ago, and it's just holdable by your hand. Stick it in a bit of cling film or Glad wrap if you're from Australia. This will go in the fridge now for a few hours to cool down. It needs to be cold to the touch. It's miserable to roll out when it's hot, and the gluten strands haven't had enough time to develop whilst it's still hot. Be mindful of these. Use pork sausages with natural pork casings, and you'll see you can squeeze it out like that. If you use collagen cased sausages, you can't get the meat out in the middle. It sticks to it. So look for sausages with natural casings. As a matter of fact, in these pies you can stick absolutely anything in. Baked beans, you could crack an egg in there, you can do anything in a pie. The beauty of this water pastry is it can handle moist content. So if you were to just fill it with eggs or some kind of liquidous sauce, it would be fine. It wouldn't ruin the pastry. As you can see, it rolls out rather nicely. It's very forgiving pastry. can be as rough as you like, and it just stays together. Those flecks of herbs I think look rather good, and it puts an amazing flavour to the pie. I'm just using my thumb here, as you can see, just to squish it in. Well, I become the pie mould. Those tins that I'm using are very high walled. If you're not used to stuffing pies, or you haven't got tins that like that, you can use any tin obviously to make a pie. But the whole beauty of hot water pastry is that you can build high walled pies and they stay perfectly rigid and crispy from top to bottom. Don't worry if it's not sitting flat on the bottom at this point, because when you put the filling in, it'll push it down and take any air bubbles out. Now we want these pies to look as rustic as hell, which they do by default. I don't think you can make them nice. So it's one of those things which turns out nice just because. As you can see, the air is going to get pushed out now. Yep, there it goes. Air gone. It couldn't be any simpler. I mean, I didn't make the sausages. I do make sausages, but in this instance I bought these, as you could see. And I go around and fill them again later. I just want to even the meat out at this point. You'd pay good money for these pies in a shop. But the individual costs, the actual net cost of these pies is very low. I think the sausages were £2.50 and the pastry cost is probably 70p, something like that. So that mac and cheese I made with my, a year old in fact, smoked cheddar, which I smoked last year. So you make a mac and cheese to suit yourself. But once you've had one of these mac and cheese pies, you will be making more of them. They look a bit gnarly at the moment, but when they're cooked they don't. So these two won't have a lid because they don't need it. The sausage pies will have lids, which I'll make in a minute. So I'm only making a few pies this time. I usually make them in batches of 8 or 10 just to make it worthwhile, and I'll stick them in the freezer. They can stay in the freezer for months and months and months. And what I do, I defrost them and put them in the microwave for a couple of, or a minute at the most, and finish them off in the oven, and you can have a stinking hot pie in 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes, perfectly cooked. Stop fiddling, Grant. It's painful watching myself. Okay, use a sort of a bluntish knife, just go around the edge. Sharp knives don't work as well. A blunt knife actually works better, weirdly. I'm using the rolling pin to do a similar. There's a reason I did it differently, because I wanted to create that rim that you can see around the top, and that will act as a lip for the lid to stick to. You'll get the gist of it in a minute. Okay. Lid time. So at this point, that's been rolled out before, and it'll start to get quite tough after a while. So you are on a sort of a time limit. the more you work it, the tougher it gets, and it will start to get very elastic. I'll show a little clip in a bit of just what I mean. It's still workable, but it's not as nice to use. So just let it sag in the middle a little bit, so there's no tension on it. And that will push down to that lip that you've created from the previous rolling. Steady on. Just carefully thumb it round without getting too ham-fisted. You don't need any water or anything like that, like you do with traditional pastry making, to make it stick. This stuff is just epoxy. It's amazing how it sticks to itself. So light hands, you can do good work. I mean, it looks like I've been doing that for a while. I haven't. I make these pies with very large gaps in between. So I'm no expert by any means. It's just that easy to use. You can see it's starting to spring back on itself now. That's the gluten getting really tough. But you can see it still rolls out without breaking or shredding, or I mean, that's got a reasonably high fat content to flour. So if you have a really short crust pastry, it's usually half fat, half flour, half fat. But this is so much less fat. The fats from rapeseed oil and olive oil help the LDL cholesterol, which is the good one, rather than the HDL, which is the bad one, which you'll get from saturated fats and trans fats. So keeping off the lard is a good thing. Eat these pies with impunity, is what I say. But of course the sausage stuffing in there is full of fat, so that kind of blows that out of the water. But you don't have to use pork sausage. You could use anything lean. I normally make pheasant pies, which is very, very lean meat indeed, virtually no fat at all. I'm just fooling around here really. Just give a little press on the edge. If you use a fork, you can make a nice little pattern around the edge. If the camera wasn't pointing at me, I'd probably experiment a little bit. Each time I try and make the edges of the pies a bit different, so they're all sort of have their own characters. It's quite nice if you make a batch of them and you say you have people around for dinner, each person gets a different looking pie. All adds to the rustic charm. This part's important. You don't want the contents to be spilling out from the joint. It will bust the joint on the lid and make it very, very difficult to get the pie out of the tin, because the juice will run down the side, caramelize and turn into glue. So those slits in the top are important. Just make sure they're open so they don't seal back up. Forget that part at your peril. Okay, I don't usually use egg. I'm using egg this time for this video because I have a bit of an egg allergy. Not so much with just the yolk. Don't use an egg white. Make sure you use the egg yolk only. It makes the best colour. There is a science, it escapes me, I can't remember why, but if there's any egg white mixed in with it, it changes the chemistry and you don't get that same lovely look if you beat a whole egg and use it as a glaze. Don't mind me. And I'm actually going to stick it on top of the macaroni as well. It's a nice touch actually. Normally if I make these without doing the egg wash, they come out a very nice colour, but not as golden, as lush looking as what these will with this yolk on. These egg, there's no saturation in this video, by the way. The colour is what it is. The eggs I'm using are golden yolks. So I've got it on a fan oven, and I dump it at 200 degrees Celsius. So this is the pastry after I finished. I'll just show you what I mean by the how it gets really plasticky. See it shrinking? Didn't really need to point it out, but there it is. So it's still usable, but it's becoming less usable, and it will get to a point where it's not nice to use and it will break like that. But it gives you enough time to make, I've made 10 pies in a row and it's fine. Okay, I put them in a tray. I have no idea why I put those in a tray. I usually put the tins straight on the rack. That one underneath is a pie I made that came out of the freezer. It's starting to cook nicely. That one on the bottom there, that's one without a wash. You can see the difference. And that's a pheasant pie. I make those for Christmas. The insides are cooked, absolutely. That's the pork sausage one, and that was the macaroni. So what I do now, this is important for me, I flip them out of their tins. You run the knife around like that, and I turn them upside down. I pop them back in the oven. Don't have to. It is cooked, but what it does, the oil that's in the pastry it'll fry, and it will crisp that crust up like you wouldn't believe. Takes it to another level. Now that extra time, you see flexibility, it's perfectly cooked, it's lovely, like that. But if you just crust it up a little bit, that's ready to eat, that one. Okay. Boom. There we go. Nice. That's more like it. So you can pick them up, they're all firm. That's the effect you want. And that is a perfect pie. Well, I think so. Yep, hot ground. God, the things I do for YouTube. Well, that concludes the pie recipe. Well, if you unleash these on your guests, you'll be legendary. Trust me, they are extremely tasty. All right, thanks for watching. Next recipe will be world's best rock buns. Bye.